Okay, everybody, we're going to read our next chapter of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde called The Last Night. So if we look at this picture right before our chapter, it says a screech came from within Jekyll's office as Poole and Utterson broke down the laboratory office door. So it looks like Mr. Utterson is trying to break down the door with an axe, and Mr. Poole is giving him light from a candle in order to do it. So something really intense must be happening. So let's go ahead and dive into the story. The Last Night. Mr. Utterson was sitting by the fireside one evening after dinner, when he was surprised to receive a visit from Poole. "Dear me, Poole, what brings you here?" he cried. Poole looked gloomy. He stood with his shoulders bent and his head hung low. "What's wrong with you?" asked the lawyer. "I am very worried about Dr. Jekyll," said the butler. "He is shut up again in the laboratory, and I don't like it, sir. I think there's something wrong. Will you come with me and see for yourself?" Mr. Utterson's only answer was to rise and get his hat and coat. A look of relief appeared on Poole's face. It was a cold, gloomy night in March. Dark clouds raced across the moon as the wind began to rage, and Mr. Utterson shivered. He wondered what horror he might find at Dr. Jekyll's. When the men entered the house, Poole reached for a candle. Meanwhile, all the servants gathered around the fire in fear. "Now, sir," said Poole, "can you come as softly as you can?" Once they reached the laboratory, Poole told Mr. Utterson to stand to one side and listen while he knocked on the office door. "Mr. Utterson asking to see you, sir." A voice moaned from behind the closed door. "Tell him I cannot see anyone," it said. Taking up his candle, Poole led Mr. Utterson back across the yard to the kitchen. "Sir," said Poole, "was that my master's voice?" Utterson shook his head. "It seems changed," he replied. "Yes," whispered Poole. "What I really think is that Dr. Jekyll has been killed. It was a week ago when I heard him crying out to God. The person who killed him is in there now." "This is rather wild tale, Poole," said Mr. Utterson. "Well, there's something stranger yet," said Poole. "Whoever is in there cries out in a rage for some kind of drug. Every day I find a note by the door sending me to the drugstore. Shortly after I return with the drug, there's another note telling me to bring it back because it is not right." Poole showed Mr. Utterson one of the wrinkled notes. "One day," continued Poole, "I suddenly came upon the creature. He must have slipped out to look for this drug among the boxes in the laboratory. He saw me and gave out a cry as he ran back to the office. I saw him for only a moment, but it made my hair stand on end. He was so ugly. That thing was not Dr. Jekyll." "Well, then," said Mr. Utterson, "it is my duty to break down the door. One last thing, Poole. Was this creature Mr. Hyde?" Poole scratched his head. "Well, sir, he was so humped over and ran so fast that I admit I think it was." Poole found an axe among the boxes and picked it up with a firm grip. Meanwhile, Mr. Utterson was listening to the footsteps in the office. "It walks by day and night, sir," said Poole. "I've even heard it weep." "Jackal," cried Utterson, "I want to see you." "Utterson," answered a weak, shallow voice, "have pity." "Oh, that's not Jackal's voice, it's Hyde's," cried Utterson. "Down with the door." The Poole gripped the axe and swung it over his shoulder. The blow shook the building, and a screech came from behind the door. The laboratory door was as thick as an oar, so up went the axe again and again until the door fell in. Inside the room lay the twisted body of a man on the floor. The two men turned it over on its back and saw the wrinkled face of Edward Hyde. From the crushed test tube in his hand and the strong smell of drugs in the room, Utterson knew he was looking at the body of one who had taken his own life. The men searched the house for Dr. Jekyll, but he was nowhere to be found. Shallow pools of drugs dotted one table in the office. Poole knew that the drug as the one he had been sent to find. While looking through the papers on Jekyll's desk, he found a will with the same wording as to the one he had objected. To Utterson's great surprise, he, not Mr. Hyde, was named to receive Jekyll's property. "I do not understand," said Utterson. "Hyde was here all these days. It must have made him mad to see my name instead of his." Yet he didn't burn it. There was a note written in Dr. Jekyll's hand and dated that very day. "Oh, Poole!" exclaimed Utterson. "Jekyll was alive today. He must still be alive." Utterson brought the paper to his eyes and read, "My dear Utterson, when this falls into your hands, I shall be gone. Read the letter Lanyon left you, then read the contents of the next envelope, Henry Jekyll." "I must go home and read this," said Utterson. "Now we shall know the truth."